All right. So I believe we are live now. So first up, I would just like to thank everybody. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. This is the first session of our NextSpace sessions. The conversations will lead around space is critical infrastructure. And today, our focus is on European sovereign financing. My name is Sam Bender. I'm the Senior Marketing and Communications Manager here at Reflex Aerospace, and I'll be moderating today's conversation. So in the studio, we have two leaders who bring complementary perspectives on what it takes to build, scale, and most importantly for this conversation, fund space technology companies in Europe today. Our goal is simple. We're going to explore what Europe needs to do to stay relevant in space and how to navigate the current ecosystem. So, to get started, I'd love it if both of you could give a quick introduction about who you are and why this conversation matters. So, maybe we start with you today, Bulent.
Well, thanks for having me, Walter and Sam. We're here just to talk about why space matters. And for people who may not know me, I'm Bulent. I'm one of the two founding partners of Alpine Space Ventures. It's a European venture capital fund investing into space industry here in Europe, but also over in the US. And I bring to that fund about 2 decades of NewSpace experience, having been over in SpaceX for many years and leading avionics, guidance, navigation, control, and then over to Starlink mission assurance, and then really bringing that experience over here to invest and then help out companies build the critical infrastructure we need for sovereign solutions.
Yeah, and I'm Walter. I'm the founder and CEO of Reflex Aerospace. My company builds satellites, typically with dual use cases in mind. And these satellites increasingly will matter in context of critical infrastructure in Europe, because we need to shift from big monolithic systems to distributed networks of systems, and one critical technology for that are the sophisticated microsatellites we built here.
All right. So with that, thank you both for joining us today. And as a first question, I think we just need to set the stage here. So space is often seen by the European public as a primarily scientific endeavor. But that's changing. Why should we understand space as critical infrastructure, especially here in Europe? And I think this one might also make sense to start with Bulent, if you'd like to lead the conversation.
No, absolutely. And I would say space is an ever-expanding industry. It has not lost its scientific part. Don't get me wrong. I think space science still is an exciting thing, and as humans, we need to explore what we do. But what's happening is space is expanding into every other part of our life as well, and is slowly really penetrating everything we do. Rewind back about 40 years, you would realize that if you had talked about the internet, you would think everyone would talk about a scientific tool. It was like the World Wide Web was invented in a scientific institution here in Europe in CERN to catalog scientific data. Today, you can't even sell shoes without it. So in that context, space is going through the same transformation. It's the backbone of everything we do. Today, when you use GPS to go from A to B, when you call yourself an Uber, when I try to walk in a town that I don't know, space is what enables that GPS. When you are today flying between two locations, when you are even in an area without cell phone coverage, space fills that gap. Today, when you're looking into covering risk of wildfires and floodings and whatever may be happening, you use space technology to take a look. And of course, very relevant right now in Europe, defense cannot be thought about space capabilities. Today, being able to look into your adversary and see what they're doing, even in peacetime, is becoming important, and even more so when you are in a conflict, because you need to communicate, you have to have intelligence. So overall, we cannot really think about space outside of our life anymore. It's just like the internet. It's a part of an inclusive industry that is covering everything. And that is no different in the US than it is in Europe, than it is in China or any other location.
Yeah, true. And like so far, all these capabilities, both like transfer of data as well as like positioning, navigation, and as well as reconnaissance, Europe has always been dependent on US American capabilities, right? So the war in Ukraine actually started in space, like, and it was Starlink in the end, which changed the course of the whole conflict. That can be said for sure, right? So, and there are so far so strong dependencies which we need to kind of break and replace certain capabilities through sovereign European capabilities, which are being built in Europe by European companies. But that also requires these companies and these developments to be predominantly funded out of Europe, because otherwise the dependency is there again, right? It's shifted from like the product level dependency to funding level dependency. It's in the boards and in the investor meetings and so on, but it's still a dependency, right?
Sam, we lost you.
Sorry, gotta unmute. Yeah, I was gonna say, Walter, great answer. Do you have any more on that before we move on to the next one?
No, we can move on.
All right, fantastic. So, yeah, I think that this talk about Ukraine and about other sort of space capabilities leads into the next question, which is all about the capability gap. Right now, there's a lot of talks about the ISR capability gap in Europe, and that's intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. It's one of a few areas in which the capability gap is growing between the EU and the US year after year. What does that situation tell us about the state of space infrastructure today?
I'll jump in on that if you don't mind.
Please.
I think if you look into the European capabilities, we are a very technologically capable continent. In Europe, we have a lot of capabilities that the US relies on to build their systems. We build a lot of technology companies, but very often that's where we fall short. From technology companies, we are very often not great in building product and service companies, the ones that really finalize and build the solution. That is, to a certain extent, again, as we had talked about earlier, because we looked at space capabilities as one of research and technology development. Space was the actual goal, not the actual service that space brought with it. We made the product the goal, the thing that we finance, not the answers it provides. That shows a little bit of a limited mindset that caused this. We had a top-down approach to space capability, where civilian and defense use cases were separated. Over years, we had a centralized acquisition process that was mostly driven in the European space companies by the civilian agencies that rather wanted to emphasize the creation of technology, which I will argue is fantastic. You want the technology, but then, of course, when it came to ISR, we lacked DoD, the MODs, and the other intelligence agencies, the intelligence community in the customer list, and they were not acquiring the built technology then to build services or build companies that provide those services. So that overly centralized yet single-focused procurement generated companies that do not roll out ISR capabilities. And interestingly, today when you argue it, you still from the same places here, but no, we have the capabilities. Well, they're not deployed. They are not in use. And if you're not using them, if you're not the ones operating them, you also do not know if they work well or not. Because in the operation is yet another thousand details that make it operational. Look onto the other side of the Atlantic, the US. The US commands over a vast space capability. By the way, they're not sleeping. They're building a lot more. As we said, the gap is opening. Look at institutions like the NRO, the NSA, the Missile Defense Agency. These are giant institutions that operate assets in space for capabilities of ISR. We are lacking those same capabilities, and they are critically needed. Look at what is going to be important in Europe. Missile defense knowledge, just being able to even tell someone fired at you. We lack that capability. So today, we need to start thinking what steps further, deploy constellations, deploy multi-layer solutions to keep an eye out on it because of many reasons. One, we need to be sovereign and capable on our own if partners aren't there to help us. And even when partners are there, we want to be a partner of equals. So a partner that only wishes to receive is not a partner at all. It's a protectorate, and that's not what we want to do.
Yeah, and just to support this point, I think that Europe has been in a very comfortable position for the last couple of decades, right? So they were in a very stable political situation with obvious situations on the eastern and western flanks. And this has led to primarily a demand for strategic reconnaissance and like pictures and images every now and then in a very, very high quality, and that had led to certain requirements for these assets. And as a result, very, very big, very highly sophisticated systems have been developed by the primes in Europe and launched. And let's face it, Europe has the capabilities to build these systems, and they are cutting edge and probably in some cases even better than the systems deployed in the US. But the context has changed, right? And in the new context, other types of data are required. And unfortunately, those systems which we are capable to build here are not meeting the goals in terms of timeline, in terms of costs, and are also like inducing risks because the development time of a system like that is like several years. It can be already outdated at the very moment when it's launched, right? So we need a mind shift here. We need to shift to smaller, more agile projects and use maybe like a good enough approach instead of like aiming for absolute excellence, and that might help to close the gap, or at least to prevent it from getting bigger and bigger over time.
You know, when we're talking about this gap and we're talking about the capabilities, it's a lot about the end results or what people see. But we know that this starts much, much earlier. And this is one of the areas in which there are these differences between the US and Europe. But I want to get back to that funding question that we began with. So, Bulent, you've seen space from both engineering and from the boardroom. When you're thinking about investing in a company, what makes a space company worth backing?
Overall, I would say space is a frontier industry. We are creating capabilities very often with a vision of where to plug in that technology afterwards. As I alluded to earlier, we need to go away from generating space for space sake only. We need to generate space for a use case, for a value chain that ends in some other technology or need on the planet somehow. What really is interesting for us is a business case where the founder looked into a value chain that's going to be created and is building a existential part of it that's going to generate that demand and has really a go-to-market plan for it, maybe even for a market that doesn't even know it needs that technology, but has a good way of rolling it out and really penetrating that market and selling a product. When I was at SpaceX and I was there from almost the first years, there wasn't really a demand signal that was there. People weren't saying we need more rockets, but there was a very clear message to what needs to be built and what the market we thought needs, and we had a technical clarity of what that meant. take the rockets of today, rethink them, and how to take cost out. Cost reduce, high cadence launch was the goal. And we built it, and suddenly the market generated itself. That technical clarity with a go-to-market plan, and then being able to execute it, of course, is what makes the story. And in the early years, these are the elements. You look into the eyes of the founder and look for those elements. Let's take Reflex as an example. I think that's quite relevant here. That's exactly what we look for. When we look for Europe, we look for a company that goes beyond the idea of I'm going to build X number of satellites. That wasn't the goal. The goal was to sell sovereignty. The goal was to build a capability that your customer, in this case, Europe, needed. And what was that capability? Being able to deploy small to medium-sized satellites, custom made, because the market, we believe, needed it. And every other founder wasn't really thinking that way. They were building the companies that were just copycats, or they were just doing the thing they thought was the right one. We looked into the plans of Reflex, and what I realized is the plan was more tailored towards what the customer needed. The customer didn't need the same old satellite over and over again. It needed a quick turnaround, custom solution, and then scalable. And that level of clarity, understanding your customer, having a go-to-market plan, and being able to explain it to your customer base, that's what excited us, and that's why we did the investment.
Yeah, I mean, we like, yeah, I'm probably in the wrong position to explain why to invest in certain space companies, because we are an investment target ourselves. But for us, it was always very important to focus on a limited part of the whole value chain, not to add too much on the sides, not to do like space as a service end to end and with all these additional bells and whistles, but really to focus in the early stages on the most important USPs, which for us is the tailoring and the time to orbit. Time to orbit is critical, I think, in a decade where the pressure and the obsolescence risk are so high for our customers. We need to find a way to build satellites faster while remaining very sophisticated and powerful, right, on the solution side.
Now, on that solution side, Walter, I know that the industrial landscape of Europe is famously complex, and I know this from working at Reflex because we see this every day. From your perspective, what are some of the largest friction points, and how would you overcome them as somebody looking for funding, but also looking to deliver on this promise of fast, high-performance satellite capabilities?
Well, I think one of the key problems in with European institutions is like the fact that their KPI is not necessarily to build cutting-edge space capabilities. It's more an industrial policy kind of KPI. So it's about making a lot of stakeholders happy, because European institutions are very complex by their nature. There are like so many states, so many stakeholders paying into the same pot, and then this money is distributed. It's obvious that everybody needs to like to get his or her share, and this is a very problem when it comes to space, because like making everybody happy is not necessarily that doesn't necessarily mean that the technical system is the best possible technical system, right? So, and we have made a lot of attempts to find ways to overcome this, and we have worked with ESA, we have worked with the European Commission and others, and I think that maybe the geopolitical challenges which Europe is facing right now will lead to some kind of a little bit streamlining and recalibrating these institutions, hopefully, so that they can like lead to meaningful progress in the end, right? That's probably it.
So, yeah, I think overall Europe is a complex environment, but it's interesting, right? I alluded a little bit more towards it earlier when I said, look at the US. They have the administration, they have space administration under NASA, but then they have a very healthy intelligence community and the DoD that procure services and design services themselves and are highly active in their domain. Europe is quite different. We have an even more prescriptive space agency, so one that really tells you every single nut and bolt you have to use and how you have to solve every single problem. But then we have we have MODs, an intelligence community that is almost vacant. They really have a few champions in Europe that they just turn to and say, give me what you got. And then they are not prescriptive at all. They are not even in the architecture. And that really results in, on one side, project companies, and on the DoD side, large primes. And both of them are not the kind of institutions that private capital likes to go into. There is no product, there is no scalability, and there is no competitive market. One side is a cost plus, the other one is a consulting and project engineering. What we really need is a more engaged yet less prescriptive industry and a more streamlined approach across both sides. We need an ESA that procures services and the National Space Agency that procures services without having to go and tell how people need to do it, because let's face it, the job of making commercially viable products is the job of a founder. A space agency doesn't have that knowledge, period. Then my whole life is trickle down taxpayer money. I don't get to know capital efficient operation. That's just the way it is. So we want to get them into less prescriptive, but then we also have to get the DoDs and the intelligence community to be in the room and co-designing as well, but co-designing, not prescribing. IRIS² is a great example. Look at IRIS² on one side, the Space Development Agency's proliferated warfighter architecture on the other. IRIS², they didn't know what to do, and they still don't know what to build. So they just give the keys some large prime and say, go build it for us, and nothing comes out of it. How many years have we been working on it? Nothing. Nothing is there. No more than a bunch of air travel and a bunch of paper. Looking on the other side on the SDA, working with the industry. First, they did industry research, found out what's the industrial base, and then they did an architecture in which multiple companies in a multi-tranche version can sell services and can sell products that the Space Development Agency plugs together and then uses the commercial space infrastructure to build a capability. How awesome is that? And we are missing that here in Europe. So I really say my rule of thumb is we need to make MODs and the space agencies talk to each other. One side needs to do a little bit less and one side needs to do a little bit more.
Yeah, so we need anchor customers instead of grants. That's probably also an important thing, because like in grants, companies tend to like develop stuff they didn't plan to develop in the end and end up being dependent from these grant, right? Instead of like really executing their own business strategy and growing and becoming successful in the end. So that's probably also a thing which needs to change here. And I think that also requires a shift in the mindset a little bit. At least in Germany, not sure about the other European countries, but in Germany, that's a big blocker.
But that's exactly what also made Reflex stand out for us. Let's face it, we know this is it's a binary outcome. Either this is going to happen, or we're going to be in a very non-competitive environment. And I think we all believe Europe is waking up. We're seeing this first signals, so we know the changes that are coming, and that's what we've made Reflex stand out. We know this change is coming, so let's build the companies that can benefit from it right now. And Reflex builds like the U.S. startups that benefited from the SDA approach, like York and Tyvac and a couple of others. They built like that. So the same, it only comes natural that we expect a company like Reflex be successful when Europe makes success.
Okay, so now we're getting into this sort of discussion, US versus Europe. We're talking about SDAs. We're talking about how to be a little bit more flexible, agile, lean. Right now, what we're looking at is that Europe's spending in space is a fraction of the US. It's about 0.06% of GDP, which is about 4 times less than the US dedicates. So, what does Europe need right now to become that competitive force in space technology over the next decade or so?
I would argue, yes, the U.S. spends more, the U.S. spends more than Europe, and I think Europe needs to spend more, but I don't think we need to match. Let's look at the NASA budget and what just got cut out of it, and you look at places where the U.S. was burning money irresponsibly. We had a rocket that doesn't launch ever, that's going for billions, launch a capsule that doesn't go nowhere for billions, and that we had a space industry that didn't have the discipline that was necessary to make competitive companies across the board. So I don't think it's just money that's the answer. I think it's selective money, winners and losers. I'm saying this as a venture capitalist, but a capitalist structure and market dynamics that is the solution. For me, the right way to do it is going away, as Walter said, going away from just doing a little bit, pouring money in everything that we find, going away from the grant model, from the project model, and start acquiring services in a fixed firm price, competitive way, which gives, on paper, same chances to the prime as it does to a new entrant. We need actual comparisons. We need transparency in that as well. And we need to really realize that we need to just compare almost mathematically what comes out of a startup and a big giant. Look at how IRIS² started. Literally, we wrote rules just to rule out any new entrant and see where that is leading us to. So we need that. Secondly, we need financing through selective means. What is a selective mean? VCs like us. We need private capital coming in. My job is to look at companies and decide what is going to, in my mind, go be successful or not. And I bring both the technical side and the investor side. And I think if we're going to give money to early entrants, go find people like us and outfit us with capital. It's a little bit self-serving, but that's just the way it is. And there has to be winners and losers. You can't just live with thousands of zombie companies there. That's what we're looking for. We need public capital, yes, but we need it deployed smartly. I think investing through other investors, through like how the EIF gave us money, is a good way. So, and then we need the government to play the role of a customer in a fair and competitive environment, one that doesn't prefer the usual suspects.
Yeah. So Bulent said almost everything I had on my sheet here as well. So maybe one thing to add. So we don't need that much capital. We just need to spend it wisely, which means that we need a certain amount to accept a certain amount of consolidation in the markets as well. All right. And which means that we need to try to create champions, right? Companies capable of competing internationally, right, out of Europe. And that must mean that the money and the capital, private and public, must be invested in a wise, forward-looking way. And this spray and pray mentality, which we see often also like here in our country, where like very limited budgets are evenly distributed over a large number of companies, this leads nowhere in my mind. So we have seen that with ESA Aerospace, for example, where I guess a 10 million contract from the government has led to significant private funding being poured into the company subsequently. this is the way to go, right? Instead of what we also seen here in Germany, the small satellite initiative, where like 10 million euro have been distributed over like, I don't know, 15 projects, which is also not very smart, because in the end, 200,000 euros for each company doesn't lead to anything. So.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense, and is probably a good place for us to start wrapping up, since we have reached the time now where we get to wind down. But I did want to ask just one last question, because I know we have a lot of people listening with a diverse background, VCs, startups, engineers, other people. And I want to ask both of you, if there's one thing that this audience should take away from today's session, what is it? What's your key point?
I think space is critical infrastructure for Europe, and Europe is going through a renaissance right now of where space is needed. That infrastructure is being built right now. I'd say we're gonna quickly go towards the American model that we've seen work over on that side of the Atlantic, and therefore I'd say we're gonna have a system of winners and losers, and those winners are going to be the ones that are fast, focused, and given current Europe's focus, dual use ready.
Yeah, similar message from my side. I think that Europe can lead, right? But it needs to move like beyond endless planning processes and start to build, right? And it needs to accept that not everybody in the end will be happy internally, right? But this will lead to a externally competitive Europe in the space domain.
Well, alrighty. I think that just about does it. So yeah, Walter, Bulent, thank you so much for your time. Thanks to everybody who joined us today. You can find more on Alpine Space Ventures at alpinespace.vc, or you can learn more about Reflex Aerospace at reflexaerospace.com. For everybody who's tuning in, I hope to see you all again at our next NextSpace session. The theme will be announced later, and you can find out more about it on our LinkedIn page. So yeah, I wish you all a great afternoon and hope to talk to you soon.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Walter. And it was fun to be here.
Bye.